In the Montana wilderness, a grieving veteran and his loyal German shepherd were about to confront the silence of memory. What began as a memorial hike turned deadly when a hidden government facility reactivated beneath the snow. Logan Pierce wasn't your typical widowed hiker. For over a decade, he was part of a classified K9 Special Reconnaissance Unit, known for executing covert operations with inhuman precision, thanks to a neural sync with his military working dog, Shadow. When dormant security systems reawakened and a Black Ops recovery team was dispatched to eliminate all traces, they had no idea they were walking into the path of a weapon they themselves had created. Logan used his fractured memories and Shadow's uncanny instincts to initiate a silent war, one that would unleash evidence capable of dismantling the program that built him. What began as a personal journey to honor his late wife would become a reckoning with a buried past. The wilderness would never be the same after Logan Pierce remembered who he really was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The snow crunched beneath Logan Pierce's boots as he stood at the trailhead, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated into the gray Montana sky. Beside him, Shadow's tall ears were alert, his black and tan coat a stark contrast against the surrounding white. The German shepherd's warm presence was the only thing keeping Logan tethered to the moment. "This is it, boy," Logan said, his voice rough from disuse. He hadn't spoken much since the funeral, 3 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days ago. Not that he was counting. Shadow's intelligent eyes watched as Logan knelt to place a small wooden carving, a chickadee at the base of a weathered trail marker. Marissa had loved those birds, said they reminded her that even the smallest things could survive the harshest winters. "She should be here," Logan whispered, running his gloved fingers over the carving. "1 year back from deployment, she promised we'd hike this trail again when I got back." The wind picked up, whistling through the pines. The sound felt wrong, somehow hollow and distant. Logan straightened, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. The locals in the small town 20 miles back had warned him against this hike. Stories of missing people, strange noises in the night. Old Man Jenkins at the general store had been particularly adamant. "Something ain't right up there anymore, son," he'd said, refusing to meet Logan's eyes. 3 hikers gone since October. Search and rescue couldn't find hide nor hair. Logan had dismissed it as small-town superstition. He'd seen real horrors in Afghanistan. IEDs hidden in children's toys, villages burned to ash. What could these woods possibly hold that would frighten him? Shadow growled suddenly, low and deep. Logan turned to see the dog staring fixedly at the tree line, hackles raised. "What is it, boy?" Logan followed Shadow's gaze but saw nothing unusual among the dense pines. Just shadows and silence. Too much silence, he realized. No birds. No rustling of small animals. Just the wind and their own breathing. "Come on." He patted his thigh, and Shadow reluctantly fell in beside him as they started down the trail. The path was different than Logan remembered. 4 years ago, he and Marissa had hiked this same route during a weekend pass. It had been summer then, the trail well-maintained and busy with other hikers. Now it was overgrown, fallen branches and thick undergrowth making progress difficult. Winter had reclaimed what humans had abandoned. They were an hour in when Logan noticed the first oddity: deep gouges in a pine trunk, about 7 feet up. Too high for a bear, too uniform for natural damage. "What do you make of that, Shadow?" he asked, tracing the marks with his fingertips. 5 parallel lines, each an inch deep in the wood. Shadow whined, pressing against Logan's leg. As they continued, Logan found himself cataloging other aberrations. A cluster of bird bones arranged in a peculiar spiral pattern, patches of moss growing in perfect circles. And strangest of all, an abandoned backpack half buried in snow beneath a twisted cedar. Logan approached it cautiously, military instincts humming beneath his skin. He used a stick to brush away the snow, revealing a high-end hiking pack, its material faded but intact. "Hello?" he called out, voice echoing in the unnatural quiet. "Anyone out here?" The silence that answered made his skin crawl. Shadow began pawing at the ground near the pack, uncovering something metal that glinted in the weak afternoon light. Logan retrieved it, a military dog tag. The name and information had been worn smooth, impossible to read. He pocketed it, a cold unease settling in his gut. Let's keep moving. Daylight's burning. The sky had darkened considerably, heavy clouds rolling in from the north. Logan checked his watch. 2:17 p.m. They had maybe 3 hours of light left, less with the storm coming. The smart move would be turning back. He looked up at the mountains ahead, something pulling him forward despite the warning signs. We'll go a little further, he told Shadow, who tilted his head in response. Another mile in, Shadow froze, ears swiveling like radar dishes. The dog stared intently at a tangle of underbrush that seemed to blend unnaturally with the surrounding trees. Logan would have walked right past it, if not for Shadow's behavior. "What is it, boy?" he asked. Moving closer, Shadow darted forward, disappearing into what Logan now realized was a hidden spur trail, barely visible beneath winter's cover. For a moment, panic seized him, an irrational fear that if Shadow vanished from sight, he would never see the dog again. "Shadow, heel!" Logan called sharply, using his command voice. The dog reappeared, but instead of returning to Logan's side, he barked insistently, then turned back toward the hidden path. Logan hesitated, checking his GPS. The device showed nothing but wilderness in that direction. No trail, no structures, nothing but endless forest for miles. Yet something about the path seemed familiar, like a half-remembered dream. Against his better judgment, Logan followed Shadow onto the narrow trail. The moment he stepped onto it, a wave of vertigo washed over him. He steadied himself against a tree, his hand coming into contact with a patch of strange bluish moss. "You shouldn't be here, Logan." He jerked his hand away, spinning around. For a split second, he could have sworn he saw Marissa standing, just behind him, her dark hair lifting in the wind, her eyes sad and knowing. "Marissa," he whispered. But there was nothing there. Just trees and silence, and his own ragged breathing. A low rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The storm was moving in faster than expected, dark clouds now directly overhead. Fat snowflakes began to fall, quickly intensifying. "We should head back," Logan said, more to himself than to Shadow. The dog whined, moving further down the hidden path. Logan stood at the crossroads, torn between logic and an inexplicable pull forward. The sensible choice was clear. Turn, around, get back to the main trail, make it to the truck before the storm hit in full force. Yet something in Shadow's insistence, in the strange familiarity of this forgotten path, in the very air around them, seemed to be drawing him onward. He thought of Marissa, of her last days in the hospital. "Promise me you'll keep living," she had said, her once strong hands fragile in his. "Find your way back, Logan. Find yourself again." Was this what she meant? This trail to nowhere? The snow fell harder now, the wind picking up strength. Decision time. Logan took a deep breath and stepped forward, following Shadow deeper into the unknown. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it. After Afghanistan, after watching Marissa fade away, what else could possibly break him? As they pressed on, the forest seemed to close around them, the trees growing denser, the silence more complete. Shadow's behavior grew increasingly alert, his movements tense and purposeful. The storm intensified, visibility dropping to mere yards, but the dog moved with certainty as if following a scent that only he could detect. Logan pulled his jacket tighter, the cold seeping through his layers. Something unnatural lay ahead. He could feel it in his bones, in the electric tension of the air, in Shadow's growing agitation. For the first time since Marissa's death, Logan felt truly alive, afraid, confused, but alive. And somewhere in the distance, just at the edge of hearing, something howled. The howl faded into the wind as Logan and Shadow ventured deeper into the wilderness. The storm intensified with each step, fat snowflakes turning into a blinding curtain of white. The temperature plummeted, the cold biting through Logan's layers. He pulled his scarf higher, covering his nose and mouth, his breath warming the fabric momentarily before the chill reclaimed it. "Stay close," Logan commanded as Shadow darted ahead, then froze, his body rigid with tension. The dog's behavior had grown increasingly unpredictable over the past hour. One moment leading with purpose, the next cowering as if struck. The terrain steepened, forcing Logan to use his hands to scramble up icy rock faces. Shadow navigated the landscape with unnatural precision, waiting at decision points as if calculating the safest route. When Logan slipped on a patch of black ice, Shadow was there instantly, allowing him to grip his thick fur for balance. "Good boy," Logan muttered, his voice stolen by the wind. "Better than any GPS." But something was wrong with his companion. Shadow's ears constantly swiveled, tracking sounds Logan couldn't hear. Twice now the dog had turned in a complete circle, hackles raised, snarling at empty air. "What do you see, boy?" Logan asked, scanning the white void around them. Nothing but trees, rocks, and the relentless storm. They crested a small ridge and Shadow suddenly bolted forward, disappearing into the white. Logan's heart seized. "Shadow, come!" He heard frantic barking, then savage growling unlike anything he'd heard from his dog before. Logan stumbled, forward, following the sounds until he found Shadow circling a waist-high stone cairn. A carefully balanced stack of flat rocks that had no business existing this far off any marked trail. Shadow lunged at the cairn, teeth bared as if it were alive. "Shadow, stop!" Logan shouted. The dog ignored him, something he'd never done since his military training. "Halt! Now!" The command voice cut through whatever had possessed Shadow. The dog froze, still growling but no longer attacking. Logan approached cautiously, examining the cairn. The rocks were covered with the same bluish moss he'd seen earlier, forming intricate patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Logan reached toward it, then hesitated, remembering the hallucination of Marissa. Instead, he nudged it with his boot. The top stone slid off, revealing a small hollow in the center. Inside lay a small leather journal, partially frozen in muddy ice. "What the hell?" Logan murmured, extracting it carefully. The leather was water damaged but still intact. Logan tucked it inside his jacket to prevent further exposure, planning to examine it when they found shelter. Shadow whined, pressing against his leg, eyes fixed on the disturbed cairn. "Let's keep moving," Logan said, suddenly anxious to put distance between them and the strange marker. They continued through a narrow ravine, the wind temporarily blocked by high rock walls. Logan used the reprieve to check his bearings. The GPS signal had grown spotty, but his last reading showed them miles from the original trail, in an area marked simply as wilderness. No trails, no structures, nothing. Yet as they emerged from the ravine, Logan spotted unnatural shapes. Ahead, the tattered remains of a campsite half buried in snow. His military training kicked in and he approached systematically, eyes scanning for threats. The tent was shredded, its fabric hanging in strips from bent poles. Nearby, a backpack similar to the one he'd found earlier lay torn open, its contents scattered. Logan examined a metal cookpot. Deep gouges marked its surface, alongside unmistakable teeth impressions. Too large for any wolf or bear he'd ever encountered. Most disturbing was the dark stain spreading from beneath the snow near what remained of a sleeping bag. Logan scraped away the fresh powder with his glove, revealing older ice-crusted snow beneath, stained a rusty brown. Blood. A lot of it. Shadow refused to approach the campsite, instead pacing its perimeter, whining softly. "I hear you," Logan said, standing to survey the destruction. "We shouldn't be here." As he spoke, a blinding pain lanced through his temple. He stumbled, pressing a hand to his head as the world around him flickered. Sand whipping across his face. The desert sun merciless overhead. The village ahead abandoned except for the dogs, unnaturally still, watching his unit approach. Sergeant Miller signaling caution as they moved toward the central well. Shadow straining at his leash, trying to pull Logan back. No. Logan gasped, the vision dissolving. But it wasn't right. There had been no mountains in the distance during that patrol, no pine trees mixed with desert scrub. The memories were wrong, fractured and reassembled incorrectly, like a broken mirror. Shadow barked sharply, snapping Logan back to the present. The dog stood several yards away, clearly agitated, wanting to move on. Logan glanced once more at the destroyed camp, then hurried to follow, the journal heavy against his chest. The storm worsened as they continued, the temperature dropping further. They needed shelter soon. Logan's head throbbed where the flashback had struck, and his thoughts felt sluggish as if moving through molasses. He pulled out the journal, squinting to read it in the fading light. The paper was warped, the ink blurred, but some entries remained legible. Day 7. Found strange moss formations again. Dr. M says not to touch. Day 12. The howling keeps us awake. Jenkins thinks it's wolves, but it's coming from inside the stone. Day 16. S is acting strange, staring at nothing, growling. Something followed us from the bunker. Day 19. My memories are wrong. I remember being here before, but that's impossible. Logan's blood ran cold. The initials, the familiar, handwriting. He snapped the journal shut, unable to face the impossible recognition forming in his mind. Shadow suddenly stopped, ears erect, body trembling. Before them loomed a massive outcropping of stone, partially embedded in the mountainside. The entire formation was covered in the blue-green moss, pulsing slightly as if breathing. Logan's head spun. The stone wasn't right, too symmetrical, too deliberately placed. And Shadow's reaction was extreme, divided between terror and what Logan could only describe as recognition. You've been here before, Logan whispered, the realization settling like ice in his stomach. We both have. Shadow whined, pressing himself against Logan's legs, then cautiously approached the rock face. He began pawing at a section near the base where the moss grew thickest. Logan followed, kneeling beside his dog. The moss felt warm beneath his fingers despite the freezing temperatures. As he brushed it aside, he revealed smooth metal beneath. Not stone at all, but something man-made, disguised by years of growth. He continued clearing the moss, uncovering what appeared to be a door, its edges almost invisible against the surrounding material. No handle, no obvious way to open it. Shadow pawed more urgently at a small panel near the bottom, partially exposed by their efforts. Logan cleared it completely, revealing a keypad with faded numbers. A code. They needed a code. As Logan stared at the keypad, another flash of pain seared through his head. 4 digits, repeated endlessly in training. His service number? No. Something else. Something they made him memorize, over and over. Shadow sitting patiently beside him as Dr. Marchek's voice droned on. Again, Pierce, the access code. Again. The vision faded, leaving Logan gasping. 4 digits burned in his mind. 7219. He hesitated, finger hovering over the keypad. This was madness. He should turn back, report the site to authorities, let them handle whatever this was. Then it came again. The howl. Closer now, resonating from somewhere behind them in the forest. Low, distorted, inhuman, and hungry. Shadow growled, facing the sound, placing himself between Logan and whatever approached. Logan looked back, at the storm, the darkening forest, the invisible threat drawing nearer. Then at the door, the mystery of what lay within. The choice crystallized. Face the known danger of the storm and whatever stalked them, or confront the unknown behind the door. His fingers moved before his mind decided, pressing the sequence. 7219. A soft hiss emanated from the door as ancient mechanisms engaged. Shadow's ears perked up, his body tense but no longer fearful. The door began to slide sideways, revealing darkness beyond. The howl came again, much closer now, echoing through the trees. Shadow barked once, urgently. Logan grabbed his flashlight and positioned himself at the threshold, one hand on Shadow's head. Together, boy. Whatever's in there, we face it together. With one last look at the raging storm behind them, Logan stepped forward into the darkness, Shadow at his side as the door slid shut behind them. The door slid shut behind them with a pneumatic hiss, sealing out the howling wind. Logan's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow corridor stretching ahead. The air inside was stale but warmer than the biting cold they'd left behind, carrying the faint metallic scent of aged electronics and something else. Antiseptic, like a hospital. "Hello?" Logan called out, his voice echoing down the corridor. No response. Shadow's posture changed immediately upon entering. Gone was the fearful, erratic behavior from outside. Now the German Shepherd moved with precision, head low, ears alert, the same stance he'd used during their combat missions in Afghanistan. "What is this place, boy?" Logan whispered, following Shadow deeper into the facility. The beam of his flashlight revealed walls of poured concrete, discolored with age but still solid. Conduit pipes ran along the ceiling, disappearing into darkness ahead. As they rounded a curve in the corridor, dim red emergency lights flickered to life overhead, casting the passage in an eerie crimson glow. "Power's still on," Logan muttered, switching off his flashlight to conserve the battery. "How is that possible?" The corridor opened into a wider area, some kind of reception or security checkpoint. A metal desk sat against one wall. Papers, scattered across its surface, yellowed with age. Logan approached cautiously, examining the documents. Most were too faded to read, but a logo in the corner caught his eye, a stylized K9 silhouette encircled by a pentagon. Shadow growled softly, staring at the emblem. "Easy, boy," Logan said, placing a hand on the dog's head. The fur between Shadow's shoulders stood rigid beneath his palm. A large sign hung askew above a set of double doors beyond the desk. Years of moisture had corroded the metal, but portions remained legible. Project H, ND, and below it, PSY, Tropic Con, Enment, facility and authorized personnel only. Logan's headache returned sharper now. Flashes of memory, a white room, restraints, Shadow muzzled and struggling on a metal table while men in lab coats took notes. The images vanished as quickly as they appeared, leaving him disoriented. Shadow nudged Logan's hand with his nose, then moved toward the double doors with purpose. The dog's behavior had shifted fully into working mode, exactly how he'd acted during their deployment, sweeping buildings for explosives or hostiles. "You know this place," Logan said, the realization settling like lead in his stomach. "We both do." Shadow whined once, pushing against the doors. They swung open with a protesting groan of rusted hinges, revealing a dimly lit hallway beyond. More emergency lights flickered here, some steadier than others. Numbered doors lined both sides of the hall, most closed, a few hanging open to reveal small, Spartan rooms. Logan peered into one, a bunk, a desk, a small bathroom. Living quarters, military style but with reinforced doors and heavy locks. Not barracks, cells. They continued down the hall, Shadow leading with increasing confidence. The dog paused at an intersection, then turned left without hesitation, heading deeper into the facility. Logan followed, fighting the growing sense of familiarity with each step. A sign on the wall indicated their location. Level 1, Personnel, with arrows pointing to different sectors. Shadow headed directly toward the area marked Records, as if he'd made this journey before. The records room door was locked, but the frame had warped with time and moisture. Logan braced himself and pushed hard, the door giving way with a crack of splintering wood. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stood in various states of decay. Some toppled, others rusted shut. At the far end, a computer terminal sat on a desk, its screen dark. "Let's see what we can find," Logan murmured, moving to the filing cabinets. Most were labeled with alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to him. He tried several drawers, finding them either empty or containing moldy, illegible papers. Shadow, meanwhile, scratched at a cabinet in the corner, marked simply active. Logan worked the drawer open, revealing relatively preserved files inside. He rifled through them, finding personnel records with photos attached. Military personnel, scientists, subjects, the faces blurred together until suddenly he froze, staring at a familiar image. His own face stared back at him, younger, hair cropped shorter, but unmistakably him. The ID badge was water-damaged but readable. Pierce, L, Asset 7. Below, the photo, a security clearance level and a date. 5 years ago during what he remembered as his second tour in Afghanistan. "That's not possible," Logan whispered, his hand trembling as he held the badge. "I was never here. I was deployed overseas. This can't be real." Shadow whined, pressing against his leg as if sensing his distress. Logan flipped through the file attached to the badge, finding medical charts, psychological evaluations, and training logs he had no memory of. Pages referencing neural remapping and memory suppression protocols. His service record, altered, showing gaps where he remembered continuous deployment. "They did something to me," Logan said, his voice hollow. "To us." The facility seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing tighter. Logan's breathing quickened as he tried to reconcile the evidence before him with his own memories. Combat stress, grief over Marissa, the strange atmosphere of this place. Maybe it was all causing him to hallucinate. That had to be it. This wasn't real. Shadow suddenly tensed, ears swiveling toward the door. A mechanical whirring sound echoed from the hallway, followed by a heavy metallic clang that reverberated through the facility. Logan rushed back to the hallway, finding their path blocked. A heavy pressure door had sealed shut across the corridor. The emergency system activated. They were trapped on this level. "Damn it!" Logan slammed his fist against the metal barrier. No way through without proper equipment. Shadow barked, once turning to trot further down the hallway, away from their entry point. Logan followed, the ID badge still clutched in his hand. The weight of it felt wrong, like it belonged to someone else entirely, a version of himself he didn't recognize. They passed through areas labeled observation and analysis, Shadow leading with unwavering certainty. Logan noticed security cameras mounted in the corners of the ceilings. As they passed beneath one, its lens whirred, tracking their movement. A small red light blinked on its side. "We're being watched," Logan said, staring at the camera. Shadow growled in response. The dog stopped before a door labeled Command Center, pawing at it insistently. This door was secured with an electronic lock, its panel dark. Logan examined it, finding an emergency override, a manual lever designed for power failures. He pulled it down with effort and the door released with a click. Inside was what appeared to be the facility's nerve center. Workstations arranged in a semicircle facing a wall of monitors. Most were cracked or dark, but one flickered with static. Beneath it, a terminal hummed softly, its power light blinking. Logan approached carefully, setting down the ID badge on the console. Shadow positioned himself at the door, on guard, a behavior from their deployment days when the dog would secure an entry point while Logan worked. He hadn't given the command. Shadow had simply assumed the position automatically. The terminal's keyboard was grimy but functional. Logan pressed the spacebar, and the screen illuminated, displaying a login prompt. Without thinking, his fingers typed the same code that had opened the exterior door, 72219. The screen flickered, then resolved into a video player interface. A single file was available, dated 3 years ago. Logan clicked it, and the monitor, above the terminal, sputtered to life. A woman's face appeared on screen, early 50s, sharp features, silver-streaked dark hair pulled back severely. Her eyes were intelligent but haunted, deep circles beneath them suggesting prolonged exhaustion. She wore a lab coat with the same K9 emblem Logan had seen earlier. She cleared her throat, glancing nervously over her shoulder before speaking. "This is Dr. Evelyn Marchek, lead researcher on Project Hound. If you're seeing this..." She paused, running a hand through her hair. It means the system failed. The containment protocols have been breached. Logan leaned closer, transfixed. Shadow had abandoned his post at the door and now stood beside him, ears perked toward the screen, recognizing the woman's voice. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The subjects were never meant to return here. Marchek continued, her voice dropping lower. If you're one of them. The video corrupted briefly, her face dissolving into static before returning. Then, you need to leave immediately. What we created, what we did to you, it can't be controlled anymore. The video cut out, replaced by static. Logan pressed keys desperately, trying to retrieve the rest of the message, but the terminal responded with a harsh beep. The screen flashed once, then displayed a new message. Presence detected, initiating security protocols. Suddenly, the lights throughout the facility brightened, not just the emergency systems now, but the main power, humming to life around them. More surveillance cameras activated, their mechanical eyes turning to focus on Logan and Shadow. The building was waking up, and somewhere in its depths something answered with a hollow howl. Alarms wailed through the facility as Logan stumbled away from the terminal, Marchek's warning echoing in his mind. Shadow pressed against his leg, the dog's body tense with alertness. The walls seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the alarms, the entire structure coming alive around them. We need to move, Logan said, his military training taking over despite the chaos in his mind. They left the command center, entering a corridor now fully illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The brightness made Logan wince, intensifying his headache. As they moved forward, the nearest monitor on the wall flickered to life, displaying Dr. Marchek's face again, a different recording. Day 213 of K9 human neurological synchronization trials, she announced, her voice clinical but strained. Asset 7 and K9-19 continue to show unprecedented compatibility. Logan froze, staring at the screen. The camera panned to show a medical theater. A man was strapped to a reclined chair, electrodes attached to his shaved head. Next to him, a younger Shadow was muzzled on an examination table, similarly wired, with monitoring equipment. The man's face came into view, Logan's face unconscious but unmistakable. The neural bridge is holding, Marchek continued off camera. Heart rate synchronized at 72 BPM. Brainwave patterns approaching harmonic. Resonance. Logan's vision blurred, pain lancing through his temples. The hallway around him wavered, replaced momentarily by the medical theater from the video. He could feel the restraints on his wrists, the cold metal against his back, the invasive presence of electrodes sending pulses through his brain. "No," he gasped, pressing his palms against his temples. "That's not me. That can't be me." Shadow whined, nudging his hand. The contact brought Logan back to the present, the hallucination receding. But the monitor continued playing, showing more footage of experiments. Logan and Shadow navigating obstacle courses while wearing matching neural devices, responding to the same command simultaneously, moving as a single unit. "We've achieved something remarkable," Marchek's voice continued. "The first successful cross-species neural link. Asset 7 can now perceive what K9-19 senses, sense, sounds, environmental stimuli beyond human perception. And the K9 has gained accelerated cognition, problem-solving capabilities, even rudimentary language comprehension." The recording cut to another scene, Logan and Shadow in a combat simulation, moving with uncanny coordination. Logan firing at targets, seconds before they appeared, responding to threats only Shadow could detect. "With refinement," Marchek concluded, "Project Hound will provide our military with the perfect reconnaissance unit. Human intelligence combined with K9 sensory capabilities. The applications are limitless." The monitor went dark, then flashed with static before displaying a new message. "Security breach in Sector 3. Containment protocols initiated." Shadow suddenly jerked his head toward the end of the corridor, ears flat against his skull. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Logan followed his gaze to a heavy steel door marked Laboratory Wing. Deep gouges scarred its surface, claw marks that had torn through solid metal from the inside. "What the hell did they create here?" Logan whispered. Shadow's growl intensified, and Logan felt an inexplicable surge of dread that wasn't entirely his own. A foreign emotion that seemed to bleed into his consciousness. He could almost smell something through Shadow's senses. A musky, wrong scent that triggered instinctive fear. "We're still connected," Logan realized, the truth settling over him like ice. Whatever they did to us, it never fully reversed. They backed away from the laboratory door, Shadow leading them down a different corridor. As they moved deeper into the facility, more monitors activated, showing fragments of research footage. Logan tried to ignore them, but the images and sounds assaulted his senses. Audio files played from hidden speakers, soldiers screaming. During procedures, doctors discussing results dispassionately. Some voices were strangers, but others, one in particular, sent chills down Logan's spine. His own voice begging them to stop. "Please, I can feel him in my head. It hurts. Make it stop." Shadow whimpered, the sound synchronizing perfectly with the recorded scream as if reliving the memory. Logan stumbled, his vision fracturing again. The facility corridor dissolved around him, replaced by flashes of Afghanistan, except the sand was wrong, tinged with Montana's pine scent. The mountains in the distance weren't Hindu Kush but the Rockies. His squad members had Dr. Marchek's face, then his commanding officers, then Marissa's. "Logan." He spun around, searching for the voice. Marissa stood at the end of the corridor, her hospital gown replaced by hiking gear, her face healthy, again not gaunt with cancer. "This isn't real," he whispered, even as his heart ached at the sight of her. "No, but I am," she said, approaching slowly. "I'm your memory, Logan. The real part they couldn't erase." "What happened to me, Marissa?" he asked, voice breaking. "You were never in Afghanistan during your second tour," she said softly. "That's the cover story they planted. You volunteered for a special program to help soldiers with PTSD, they claimed. A way to synchronize with service animals for healing." She gestured to Shadow. "But it was something else. Something worse." The lights flickered violently. Shadow barked, darting to Logan's side seconds before the entire section of hallway went dark. The emergency power failed, plunging them into complete darkness. "Marissa!" Logan called out. But the hallucination was gone. The darkness was absolute. Logan fumbled for his flashlight, clicking it on. The beam seemed weak against the pressing blackness. Shadow's eyes reflected the light twin points of awareness in the void. Logan felt the dog press against him, guiding him forward. They moved slowly, the flashlight revealing glimpses of their surroundings. An abandoned corridor that dead-ended at a heavy door marked Observation. The door was partially ajar. Logan pushed it open, revealing a large room with a bank of windows along one wall. The flashlight beam played across equipment, monitoring stations, recording devices, analysis terminals. The observation windows looked down into a large chamber below, now dark and empty. "Testing arena," Logan murmured, the term coming to him without conscious thought. Shadow growled, sensing something Logan couldn't. Seconds later, a deep tremor shook the facility, dust raining from the ceiling. The dog had known it was coming before it happened. "Good boy," Logan said, kneeling beside Shadow. "You're still watching out for me." The tremor subsided, leaving the facility creaking around them. Logan directed his flashlight around the observation room, looking for anything useful. A desk in the corner held a stack of files. Most were too water-damaged to read, but one folder remained relatively intact, marked Asset 7 Final Evaluation. Logan opened it with trembling hands, finding a psychological assessment inside. The summary was damning. Subject demonstrates increasing resistance to memory suppression. Recurring dreams of his civilian life persist despite intensive reconditioning. Emotional attachment to spouse creates psychological anchor point that prevents complete neural reformatting. Recommend termination of civilian connections to ensure continued viability of asset. Below it, a handwritten note in flowing script. I cannot authorize this step. Project suspension recommended. EM. She tried to protect me, Logan realized. Marchek shut it down. Another tremor rocked the facility, stronger this time. Shadow barked urgently, moving to the center of the room. Logan followed, watching, in confusion as the dog began scratching at the floor. What is it, boy? Logan directed his flashlight beam downward, revealing a subtle seam in the flooring, a hidden hatch. Shadow continued pawing at it insistently. Logan knelt, running his fingers along the seam until he found a recessed handle. He pulled, and the hatch lifted with surprising ease, revealing a service ladder descending into darkness. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying the scent of electronics and something else. Truth, buried deep. Remember who you were before they rewired you. Marissa's voice echoed in his mind. Shadow whined, looking from Logan to the hatch and back again. The decision was clear in the dog's eyes. Down was the only way forward. Another violent tremor shook the room, knocking equipment from shelves. The observation windows cracked, spiderwebbing across the glass. The facility was becoming unstable. Logan took a deep breath, pointing his flashlight into the darkness below. Together, boy, like always. Shadow pressed against him, their heartbeats synchronizing in the darkness. Logan swung his legs over the edge of the hatch, finding the top rung of the ladder with his feet. Let's find out who we really are. He began the descent into the facility's hidden depths, Shadow watching from above, waiting for his turn to follow. Two halves of something the government had tried to forge into a single weapon, now searching for their separate truths together. The ladder descended for what felt like eternity, each rung taking Logan deeper into the facility's buried heart. His flashlight beam bounced off metal walls slick with condensation, illuminating occasional maintenance markings and security warnings. Shadow followed close behind, navigating the ladder with surprising dexterity for a dog, jumping from platform to platform where possible. When they finally reached the bottom, Logan swept his light across their new surroundings. They stood in a narrow service tunnel that branched in 3 directions, each path marked with faded directional signs. The one labeled Data Vault showed signs of recent use, dusty footprints on the floor, smudges on the access panel. Someone's been here, Logan whispered. Recently. Shadow sniffed the ground, then looked up at Logan with an intensity that seemed to transmit meaning directly into his mind. Follow these. They moved down the tunnel, the air growing colder with each step. Logan's breath fogged in front of him as they approached a massive set of double doors at the end of the corridor. Unlike the upper facility, this section appeared meticulously maintained. No rust, no decay, the security panel glowing with active power. Logan hesitated at the keypad, uncertainty gripping him. I don't know the code for this one, he said. Shadow whined, then raised his paw and pressed it deliberately against the biometric scanner beside the keypad. The panel beeped, a green light flashing as it accepted the input. K9 Asset 19 recognized, scrolled across the small screen. Secondary authentication required. Without thinking, Logan placed his own palm against the scanner. It hummed, reading his print. Human Asset 7 recognized, access granted. The heavy doors slid open, revealing the data vault beyond, a cavernous room filled with rows of server banks, their lights blinking in the darkness like a field of mechanical fireflies. The temperature here was near freezing, necessary to keep the ancient systems from overheating. In the center stood a cluster of workstations arranged in a circle, facing outward like sentinels. My God, Logan breathed, taking in the scale of the operation. What were they doing here? They approached the central workstations, most of which appeared dormant. One terminal, however, displayed an active login screen, its monitor casting blue light across the frost-coated desk. Half-empty coffee mug sat beside it, the liquid inside still unfrozen. Someone was just here, Logan said, touching the mug. Minutes ago, maybe. Shadow growled softly, eyes fixed on something in the darkness beyond the workstations. Logan directed his flashlight toward the sound, revealing a door on the far side of the vault, slightly ajar. The dog started toward it, but Logan called him back. "First things first," he said, turning to the active terminal. "Let's see what secrets this place holds." The login screen accepted the same credentials that had opened the vault doors. Once inside the system, Logan found himself facing an overwhelming archive, thousands of files organized by project phase, subject number, and outcome classification. He started with the most recent entries, accessing a video file dated just 3 years ago, shortly before his supposed final tour in Afghanistan. Dr. Marchek appeared on screen, looking more haggard than in previous recordings. Behind her, technicians hurriedly packed equipment, destroying documents. "This will be my final entry regarding Project Hound," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and what sounded like regret. "The program is being terminated following the incident. Most subjects are being redeployed with modified memories, their connections to their K9 partners severed." She looked directly into the camera, her expression hardening. "I want the record to show my objection. These men weren't soldiers, they were tools, reprogrammed for a purpose they never consented to. The neural bridges we created were never meant to be permanent, but some pairs, like Asset 7 and K9-19, developed connections that transcended our technology." The footage cut to a lab where Logan lay unconscious on an operating table, doctors working frantically around him. Shadow was in a separate room, howling with such anguish that the audio peaked and distorted. "The dogs remember," Marchek continued as the footage played. "We can alter human memory, but K9 cognition works differently. They remember everything, the procedures, the pain, the connections, especially K9-19. His neural patterns are extraordinary. He's imprinted on Asset 7 in ways we never anticipated." Logan felt Shadow press against his leg, the contact grounding him as rage built inside his chest. Not confusion anymore, but cold, focused fury. These people had taken his life, his identity, and reshaped him into something else entirely. He clicked through more files, each one revealing another layer of the experiment. Training videos showed Logan and Shadow completing impossible tasks, detecting explosives at impossible distances, communicating without commands, moving in perfect synchronization through combat zones. Medical reports documented the implantation of neural interfaces, the chemical treatments to enhance receptivity, the psychological conditioning to ensure compliance. Then Logan found a personal log from Marchek, password protected but accessible, through his credentials. Her private thoughts never meant for official records. Pierce is remembering his wife. The memory suppression is failing, especially during sleep cycles. His connection to her is somehow stronger than our reconditioning. I've never seen anything like it. And the dog, Shadow as Pierce named him, seems to be facilitating these memory resurgences. It's as if he's protecting Pierce's true identity, helping him remember who he was. Logan looked down at Shadow, understanding blooming like warmth in his chest. "You knew. All this time you were trying to bring me back to myself." Shadow's eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Logan felt the echo of the neural bridge between them. Not the invasive technology the project had implanted, but something purer that had evolved beyond their control. A connection based on loyalty and shared trauma. Continuing through the files, Logan discovered what had ended the project: a catastrophic failure during final testing. Something had gone wrong with one of the enhanced K9 subjects. The reports were heavily redacted, but phrases like extreme neurological mutation and unforeseen aggression patterns stood out. The incident had left 7 researchers dead and forced the facility's emergency shutdown. The final file was a video dated just 2 weeks ago. Logan opened it with trembling fingers. Dr. Marchek appeared, older now, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, face lined with years of guilt. She sat in the very room Logan now occupied. "If you're watching this, Logan, then Shadow succeeded." She smiled sadly. "He was always the most remarkable subject, The only one who retained not just his memories but yours as well. When I released him after the shutdown, I knew he would eventually find you and bring you back here." Logan glanced at Shadow in astonishment. "Your wife's death was the trigger, I believe," Marchek continued. "With her gone, the anchor holding your implanted memories in place weakened. Shadow sensed it and knew it was time. He's not just your companion, Logan. In many ways, he's the guardian of who you really are." She leaned closer to the camera. "I've spent years trying to make amends, documenting everything, preparing the evidence. But they're still watching. A man named Harmon leads their cleanup team. He's eliminated other subjects who started remembering. You and Shadow are the last loose ends." An alert suddenly flashed across the screen, interrupting the video. "Unauthorized access detected, remote cleanup en route. Estimated arrival 20 minutes. A map appeared showing a helicopter approaching the facility's coordinates. "They're coming," Logan said, instantly alert. "We need to grab what we can and get out." He quickly connected a portable drive he found at the workstation, copying as many files as possible. As the transfer progressed, he investigated the half-open door Shadow had noticed earlier. Beyond it lay a small living space, a cot, supplies, a portable heater. Someone had been living in the facility, monitoring the systems. On a small table sat a framed photo of a younger Marchek standing beside a group of soldiers and their dogs. Logan recognized himself in the lineup, Shadow at his side. Fresh boot prints marked the floor, leading to an emergency exit at the back of the room. The door showed signs of recent use. Someone had fled minutes before they arrived. She was here, Logan realized. Marchek was here watching the cameras. She saw us coming and ran. The file transfer completed with a soft chime. Logan grabbed the drive, then noticed a sealed envelope on the cot. His name, his real name, written on the front. Inside was a keycard and a handwritten note. "Logan, if you're reading this, I couldn't wait. Harmon is too close. Take the north emergency tunnel. It exits 2 miles from here in a cave system. The keycard accesses all sealed doors. Shadow knows the way. He's always remembered. He came back for you not because of what we did to him, but because of what you mean to each other. That bond was the one true thing to come from this nightmare. EM." As if punctuating her warning, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lights bathed the vault in crimson as a computerized voice announced, "Attention, security breach protocol initiated. All personnel evacuate immediately. Lockdown in 15 minutes. Shadow barked urgently, moving toward the emergency exit Marchek had indicated. Logan pocketed the drive and keycard, his mind clear for the first time since entering the facility. The confusion and denial had burned away, replaced by purpose. He would escape with the evidence, expose the truth, and reclaim his identity. Not as Asset 7, not as the broken veteran who'd lost his wife, but as Logan Pierce, making his own choices again. "Let's go, boy," he said to Shadow, who watched, him with unwavering trust. "Time to get out of here." They pushed through the emergency exit as the vault doors began to close behind them, sealing away the heart of Project Hound. Ahead lay a narrow tunnel, their path to freedom, if they could reach it before Harmon arrived. In the distance, barely audible over the alarms, came the rhythmic thudding of helicopter blades growing steadily louder. The emergency tunnel stretched ahead of them like a throat, emergency lights pulsing red in rhythmic waves. Logan and Shadow ran, the alarms growing more insistent behind them. The facility seemed to be tearing itself apart. Pipes burst overhead, spraying steam and water. Ceiling panels crashed down, and the concrete floor cracked beneath their feet. "Keep moving," Logan shouted as Shadow navigated each fork with unwavering confidence, choosing paths without hesitation. Lefts and rights that made no logical sense to Logan but clearly followed some internal map in the dog's mind. The sound of the helicopter grew louder, then abruptly cut off. They had landed. Harmon had arrived. As they rounded a corner, the tunnel ahead collapsed in a shower of dust and concrete. Shadow skidded to a halt, barking frantically at a maintenance shaft to their right. A tight squeeze, but their only option. Logan wrenched the grate free, ushering Shadow in first before crawling in after him. The shaft was barely wide enough for Logan's shoulders, forcing him to army crawl through accumulated dust and cobwebs. His flashlight beam bounced wildly as they moved, casting disorienting shadows. The air grew thin, each breath a struggle. Then the world glitched. One moment he was in the shaft, the next he was crawling through scorching sand, the Afghan, sun beating down on him. Gunfire erupted somewhere to his left. "Contact left! Pierce, get your ass down!" Sergeant Miller's voice shouted from nowhere. Logan froze, blinking rapidly. The desert vanished, replaced by the metal shaft. Shadow had turned back, whining urgently, nudging him forward. "Not real," Logan gasped. "That's not real." He pushed onward, but the visions persisted, overlaying reality like double-exposed film. The shaft became a tunnel in Kandahar, then back to the facility, then somewhere else entirely. A laboratory with bright lights and masked figures standing over him. Time fragmented, moments from different eras bleeding together. Shadow remained his only constant, the German shepherd's determined eyes anchoring him whenever the glitches threatened to overwhelm his senses. They emerged into a wider service corridor, Logan tumbling out of the shaft, gasping for air. Shadow immediately pressed against him, the physical contact helping to steady his fracturing perception. "I'm okay," Logan managed, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Which way?" Shadow led him down the corridor, past rooms with shattered windows and sparking equipment. The howling of the alarms distorted, sometimes sounding like the inhuman cry they'd heard in the forest. They passed a security station with active monitors. On one screen, Logan glimpsed armed figures in tactical gear sweeping through the data vault they'd just escaped. Leading them was a man in a pristine suit. Unlike the others, he wore no mask, his features sharp and predatory. He looked directly at the camera, as if seeing Logan through it, and smiled. "Harmon?" Logan whispered, the name settling into his consciousness with absolute certainty, though he couldn't recall ever seeing the man before. Another monitor flickered nearby, its image distorting. As Logan glanced at it, the screen resolved into Marissa's face, not a recording or memory, but something else. She looked directly at him, her expression urgent. "Logan, you need to remember the extraction protocol," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos around him. "Pattern Sierra 7 Echo, they made you memorize it." "Marissa, I'm not really here," she interrupted. "I'm the emergency protocol they embedded in your subconscious, a failsafe in case of memory recovery. Marchek coded me from your real memories of Marissa. Follow Shadow. Find the exit in sublevel E. Hurry." The screen went dead, leaving Logan stunned. Even his hallucinations were programmed? How much of his mind remained his own? Shadow barked, pulling Logan from his thoughts. The dog had found a stairwell leading upward, marked with a faded E symbol. They climbed quickly, each step sending shockwaves of pain through Logan's head as more memory fragments surged forward. He saw himself in training rooms, memorizing extraction routes while doctors took notes. He recalled the pain of neural implantation, Shadow howling nearby as they were connected. He remembered Marissa visiting him at a military hospital, not after Afghanistan as he'd always believed, but during his treatment here, her face devastated as doctors explained he wouldn't remember her when he woke. At the top of the stairs stood a heavy door marked Subject Processing, Authorized Personnel Only. Shadow scratched at it insistently. Logan swiped Marchek's keycard through the reader and the door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. The room beyond stopped Logan cold. It was a morgue, or something worse. Body bags lined the walls on gurneys, each tagged with an identification card. Most were empty, prepped for eventualities. Logan moved through them, drawn to one in particular, reading the tag with growing horror. Asset 7, Pierce Logan, decommission pending. "They planned to kill me," he whispered. A nearby terminal glowed with activity. A document was open on screen, a letter from Marchek. "Logan, if you're reading this, you've found your death certificate. This room is where Project Hound discarded its failures, those whose minds broke under reconditioning or whose bodies rejected the neural interfaces. You died here once, when they erased who you were. but you can choose who you are now. The program is buried but not forgotten. Only you can decide whether the truth stays buried with it. Another violent tremor shook the facility, more severe than any before. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before emergency power engaged again. This place is coming down, Logan realized. All of it. Shadow nudged him toward a door on the far side of the room marked Emergency Exit. Logan swiped the keycard again, and cold air rushed in as the door opened onto a narrow passage sloping upward. Natural light filtered down from above, their way out. As they climbed, Logan felt his mind settling, the fragments aligning into a new pattern. Not whole, perhaps never whole again, but coherent enough to move forward. What mattered wasn't which memories were real or implanted, but what he chose to do with them now. The passage grew steeper, crusted with ice near the top. Shadow scrambled ahead, his claws finding purchase in the frozen ground. Logan followed, muscles burning with exertion. "Almost there, boy," he encouraged, seeing daylight ahead. They emerged into blinding whiteness, the forest, the storm having passed during their time underground. The exit was cleverly disguised, emerging from what appeared to be a natural rock formation. Snow had drifted against one side, creating a perfect camouflage. Logan pulled himself out, collapsing onto the snow beside Shadow. For a moment, they simply breathed, steam rising from their bodies in the frigid air. The forest around them was silent, peaceful, a stark contrast to the mechanical howling of the dying facility below. Then Shadow's ears perked up, his body tensing. Logan heard it too, the mechanical whir of drones. 3 of them crested the tree line, hovering like metallic insects, their cameras swiveling to focus on them. "Run!" Logan yelled, scrambling to his feet. They plunged into the forest as the drones gave chase, weaving between pine trees as snow crunched beneath their feet. The data drive felt heavy in Logan's pocket, proof of everything that had happened to them, everything that had been taken. Behind them, the ground trembled. A section of the mountainside collapsed inward as the facility's support structures failed, nature reclaiming what had been hidden beneath for so long. But Harmon was still coming. The hunt had only just begun. Logan ran deeper into the trees, Shadow at his side, no longer handler and military dog, but 2 survivors bound by something stronger than the neural technology that had once connected them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, on their own terms. He had the files now. The truth was in his hands. And for the first time since he'd started this journey, Logan Pierce knew exactly who he was. The forest became a blur of white and green as Logan and Shadow plunged through snow-laden pines. The mechanical whir of drones followed close behind, their cameras locked on their fleeing targets. Logan's mind raced, no longer fragmenting but crystallizing into sharp focus. This was combat. This was survival. This was what they had trained him for, even if the memories had been buried. "Shadow, scatter," Logan commanded, using one of their old tactical signals. The German Shepherd immediately broke right while Logan veered left. 2 drones followed Logan while the 3rd pursued Shadow, exactly as he'd hoped. He glanced back to see Shadow making a calculated retreat, drawing the drone low between tightly packed trees. Logan ducked behind a massive pine, catching his breath as he assessed their situation. The facility's collapse would have destroyed much of the evidence, but the data drive in his pocket contained enough to expose everything, if he lived long, enough to share it. His hiking pack was gone, left behind in the facility, but he still had his basic survival gear in his pockets: multi-tool, compass, emergency fire starter, and a small first aid kit. And he had Shadow, worth more than any equipment. The drones circled overhead, their sensors scanning the area. They were military-grade, equipped with thermal imaging that would cut through the forest canopy. Simple concealment wouldn't work. They needed to move, to think tactically. A sharp yelp followed by the sound of shattering plastic and electronics cut through the forest. Logan smiled grimly. Shadow had taken down his drone. One less eye in the sky. The remaining drones intensified their search pattern, flying lower. In the distance, Logan heard the unmistakable sound of a helicopter repositioning, Harmon bringing in ground forces to sweep the area. He had minutes, not hours. Logan reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the data drive. A plan formed in his mind, risky, but their only chance. He spotted a game trail leading along a ridgeline and started moving, deliberately leaving. Clear tracks in the snow. After 20 yards, he found what he needed, a sharp embankment dropping into a ravine. Working quickly, Logan used his boot to create the appearance of a slide down the steep slope, then carefully backtracked, stepping precisely in his own footprints. At the edge of the ravine, he jumped sideways onto a rocky outcropping that left no marks in the snow, then proceeded along the harder ground where his tracks would be minimal. The ravine would funnel Harmon's team into a natural choke point, while Logan circled back toward his actual destination. The hunting cabin he and Marissa had used years ago, just 3 miles east. If it still stood, it would have what he needed. A sharp bark signaled Shadow's return. The dog appeared silently from between the trees, muzzle flecked with circuitry and wire, evidence of his successful hunt. "Good boy," Logan whispered, patting Shadow's head. "We need to move fast." They took a parallel route to the cabin, avoiding open areas where the remaining drones might spot them. Logan's military training, the real parts, not the implanted memories, guided his movements. Stay low. Use natural cover. Move in short bursts. The skills were the same, even if the context of how he'd learned them was a lie. The sound of men shouting echoed from the direction of the ravine. His decoy had worked, at least temporarily. After an hour of careful navigation, they crested a small hill to see the hunting cabin below, its roof sagging under heavy snow, but the structure still intact. Logan approached cautiously, checking for signs of recent occupation or surveillance. Finding none, he and Shadow slipped inside. The cabin was exactly as he remembered. A single room with basic furnishings, a wood stove, and most importantly, the emergency satellite communication system Marissa had insisted on installing after they'd been stranded during a blizzard. It looked ancient now, but the solar panel on the roof had kept the battery maintained. "Please work," Logan muttered, powering up the system. The equipment hummed to life, its display flickering before stabilizing. Shadow took up position at the window, keeping watch as Logan connected the data drive to the system. The satellite link was painfully slow, but it connected. Logan worked methodically, creating a compressed file of the most damning evidence: Marchek's confessions, footage of the experiments, documentation of the neural mapping process, and the list of subjects who had been reconditioned. He addressed it to multiple recipients, news organizations, oversight committees, and one specific military contact he remembered from before Project Hound, someone he believed he could trust. The upload began, creeping forward at an agonizing pace: 10%, 15%, 20%. Shadow growled softly from his position by the window. Logan joined him, peering through frost-covered glass to see the remaining drones sweeping the area in a grid pattern. They hadn't spotted the cabin yet, but it was only a matter of time. 30%, 45%, 60%. The sound of the helicopter grew, louder again. Logan's pulse quickened. They needed more time. "Stay," he commanded Shadow, stepping outside with his multi-tool. He quickly located the cabin's propane tank, partially buried in snow, and made a calculated adjustment to the valve, creating a slow leak. Then he returned inside, closing the door quietly behind him. 70%, 80%, 90%. The helicopter's noise stopped suddenly. They had landed nearby. Shadow's ears flattened against his head as he detected movement in the trees. Logan peered out again to see black-clad figures advancing through the forest, weapons drawn. Leading them was Harmon, his suit exchanged for tactical gear but his poised demeanor unchanged. 95%, 98%, 100%. "Sent," Logan breathed, as the system confirmed transmission. Shadow barked once, a warning. They were out of time. "Cover your exit, then rally at point 3. Logan whispered to Shadow using another of their tactical commands. The dog hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave him. Go. Trust me. Shadow slipped out through a small rear window that Logan had opened. Moments later, a commotion erupted on the far side of the clearing, Shadow creating a distraction, drawing some of the team away. Logan counted to 10, then stepped outside, hands raised directly into Harmon's line of sight. Agent Harmon, he called out. Let's talk. Harmon signaled his remaining men to hold position but keep their weapons trained on Logan. The agent approached alone, his expression a mask of professional detachment. Asset 7, Harmon said, his voice smooth and controlled. You've led us on quite a chase. My name is Logan Pierce, Logan replied steadily. And I'm not an asset anymore. You never stopped being one, Harmon countered, removing his gloves. You're government property with classified technology in your head, nothing more. I just sent the files, Logan said, watching Harmon's confidence falter slightly. Everything. Marchek's logs, the experiments, the neural mapping. It's all public now. Harmon's expression darkened. Nobody will believe it without physical evidence, and you won't be around to verify anything. He raised his hand, preparing to signal his team to fire, when the distinctive sound of a drone crashing came from behind him. Shadow had taken down another one, creating momentary confusion. In that split second, Logan acted. He flicked his fire starter toward the propane tank while diving for cover behind a woodpile. The spark ignited the leaking gas, creating a controlled explosion that engulfed the area between him and Harmon's team in flames and smoke. Through the chaos, Logan caught a glimpse of Harmon falling, clutching his leg where shrapnel had struck. Their eyes met across the fire, Harmon's filled with cold fury, Logan's with newfound determination. Then Logan was running, darting between trees as bullets splintered bark around him. He heard shadows bark from their predetermined rally point and changed direction to meet him. Behind them, the cabin burned, the satellite equipment destroyed, but too late to stop the transmission. They plunged deeper into the wilderness, leaving a deliberately obvious trail for the first mile. Broken branches, disturbed snow, even drops of blood from a small cut Logan made on his arm. Then at a rocky stream bed, they abruptly changed tactics, walking through the icy water to eliminate their scent and tracks before heading in a completely different direction. Hours later, exhausted but unbroken, they reached a sheltered overhang as darkness fell. Logan bandaged his arm while Shadow kept watch, both of them alert for pursuit that hadn't yet materialized. We bought some time, Logan said, scratching Shadow behind the ears. The files are out there now. Harmon can't bury this anymore. Shadow pressed against him, sharing warmth in the frigid night air. They sat in silence, watching their breath form clouds in the moonlight. Logan felt different, clarified by danger, defined by choice rather than programming. He wasn't running from his past anymore. He was running toward something else, a future he would determine for himself. We're not done, he told Shadow, pulling Marchek's keycard from his pocket. A final clue, deliberately left behind near their false trail, a breadcrumb for Harmon to follow. Proof that Logan wasn't simply fleeing, but leading him into the next chapter of this confrontation. In the darkness, Shadow's eyes reflected the moonlight, understanding passing between them without words or neural interfaces. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as handler and military dog, not as experimental subjects, but as equals forged in shared survival. As equals with a purpose. The small cabin perched on the edge of a remote cliff in the Wyoming wilderness, nearly invisible among the pines. 6 weeks had passed since Logan and Shadow had fled into the mountains, evading Harmon's increasingly desperate manhunt. Winter was beginning to relent, patches of earth emerging from beneath melting snow as March inched toward April. Logan sat by the cabin's window, an old radio transmitter crackling beside him. Shadow dozed at his feet, one ear perpetually alert even in sleep. The German shepherd had grown leaner during their time on the run, his muscles more defined. Logan, too, had changed, beard grown long, eyes clearer, movements more deliberate. The headaches had finally stopped 3 weeks ago. The radio broadcast continued, a news anchor's voice cutting through the static, continuing fallout from what internet communities have dubbed the hollow files, alleged documents exposing illegal military experiments conducted on U.S. soldiers and service animals. While the Department of Defense maintains the documents are sophisticated forgeries, 3 congressional representatives have called for a formal investigation. Logan switched off the radio, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. The files had found their targets. Not all of them. Several news organizations had refused to touch the story, but enough. The truth was spreading like a slow-burning fire, impossible to extinguish completely. "We did it, boy," he said, stroking Shadow's head. The dog opened, his eyes meeting Logan's gaze with quiet understanding. They had spent weeks moving from place to place, staying ahead of Harmon's search teams. The agent had resources, but Logan had something more valuable: intimate knowledge of how to disappear, skills buried in his muscle memory from training he'd never known he'd received. And he had Shadow, whose abilities continued to surprise him. The neural connection that the project had forced upon them had evolved into something deeper, more organic, a bond formed through shared trauma and survival. Logan turned back to the small table where an aged leather journal lay open, the same one he had found in the cairn all those weeks ago. The first half contained the fragmented notes of previous subjects, but the second half was now filled with Logan's own neat handwriting. He'd been documenting everything: the experiments, the facility, the chase, and most importantly, his gradual reclamation of his own history. He picked up a pen and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. "This will be my final entry. Tomorrow, Shadow and I return to the beginning to make an end of it. Not for vengeance, but for closure. Harmon is still searching, though the intensity has lessened since the files went public. There are whispers of internal investigations, agents questioning orders. The monolith is fracturing from within." Logan paused, considering his next words carefully. This journal wasn't just for him. It was a testament, a record for whoever might find it if things went wrong. "I've sorted through enough memories now to understand what happened. I volunteered for Project Hound after my first tour in Afghanistan, believing it was an advanced therapy program pairing traumatized soldiers with service dogs. The neural sync was supposed to be temporary, helping handlers and canines work better, as a team, while deployed. But what began as therapy became weaponization. They discovered that certain pairs, Shadow and I among them, developed connections beyond the technology's parameters. We could sense each other's perceptions without the interface. This made us valuable but unpredictable. When some subjects began experiencing severe psychological side effects, Dr. Marchek tried to shut it down. That's when they transitioned to memory suppression, creating cover stories for all of us, sending us back into the world as unwitting assets they could activate when needed. Marissa knew something was wrong when I returned. She was a nurse. She saw the surgical scars they'd tried to hide, noticed my disorientation, the gaps in my memory. She started asking questions. I don't know if her cancer was real or something else I may never know. Shadow stood suddenly, stretching before padding to the door. Time to go. Logan packed the journal into a waterproof bag along with the backup data drive he'd kept hidden. He'd spent days decrypting additional files on it, including one encrypted folder he'd only managed to access last night. They set out at dawn, traveling light and fast. Logan had chosen this cabin specifically for its proximity to where their journey had begun, the trailhead where he'd placed the wooden chickadee in Marissa's memory. They would complete the circle. By midday, they reached familiar territory. The trail looked different in the early spring, less foreboding, the silence less complete. Birds called from the trees, and small animals scattered at their approach, nature reclaiming its normal rhythms. Logan recognized the twisted cedar where he'd found the abandoned backpack, now visible with most of the snow melted. Further on, they passed the stone cairn that had contained the journal. Someone had rebuilt it, the rocks balanced precisely as before. Logan didn't touch it this time. The trail to the facility was surprisingly easy to find with the snow reduced. A path, worn by recent foot traffic. Investigators most likely drawn by the leaked files. The entrance itself was impossible to access now. The mountain's partial collapse had sealed the main door permanently behind tons of rock and earth. But Logan wasn't interested in going back inside. Instead, he led Shadow to a specific spot just off the trail. A sturdy old pine tree where he and Marissa had carved their initials years ago. The tree where he'd left the chickadee carving that now was nowhere to be seen. "This is it, boy," he said softly. "Where it all began." Logan knelt and began digging in the soft earth near, the tree's roots creating a small, deep hole. He placed the waterproof bag containing the journal and data drive inside, then covered it carefully, arranging fallen pine needles to conceal the disturbance. This spot wasn't random. It was marked on several hiking maps, a natural landmark that someone would eventually find if they knew where to look. As he finished, Logan remembered the final file he'd decrypted last night. A video message from Marchek, dated just 2 days before he and Shadow had entered the facility. She had looked older, exhausted, but at peace. "Logan, if you're watching, then you've survived long enough to decrypt my final message," she had said. "I cannot undo what we did to you in Shadow. The neural pathways are permanently altered. You will always share a connection beyond normal human K9 bonds. But I urge you now to unmake what we made. The technology was meant to enhance, but it enslaved. The true bond between you and Shadow exists despite our interference, not because of it. Choose freedom. Choose healing." Her words had resonated deeply. All these weeks, Logan had been hunting for answers, for justice, for someone to blame. But standing here now, he realized that the path forward wasn't about looking back. It was about reclaiming choice. Shadow suddenly tensed beside him, ears forward, body alert but not aggressive. Logan turned, scanning the tree line, hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. A figure stood watching them from a distance. A woman, her silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a familiar, severe style. Dr. Evelyn Marchek. She made no move to approach, simply raising her hand in a gesture that was part acknowledgement, part farewell. Logan returned the gesture, a silent agreement passing between them. No words were necessary. When he looked again, she was gone. Vanished, among the trees like a ghost. "Let's go home, Shadow," Logan said quietly. The German shepherd looked up at him, intelligent eyes reflecting understanding. They had both been transformed by Project Hound. Broken, reconfigured, weaponized. But what remained was their choice about what to do with those changes. Logan took a deep breath of the mountain air, feeling lighter than he had in years. The truth was buried and released at the same time. Justice set in motion, vengeance abandoned. He thought of Marissa, of her final request that he find himself again. In a way he never could have anticipated, he finally had. They turned away from the sealed cave in the buried past, walking side by side along the trail that led back to the trailhead. Above them, the sky stretched vast and open, clouds clearing to reveal infinite blue. Behind them, the wind whispered, through the pines, not a hollow howl anymore, but the sound of the world continuing, renewing. Logan Pierce and Shadow moved forward together, not as handler and military dog, not as experimental subjects, but as two survivors who had chosen their own path. The neural connection might always remain, but it was no longer a chain binding them. It was simply one thread in a bond woven from choice, loyalty, and shared survival. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenges, perhaps even continued pursuit. But, for the first time since he'd returned from a war he'd never actually fought, Logan faced the future unafraid. He had stopped running. He had found his way back. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.